In 1849, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard made a discovery in the ruins of ancient Nineveh that would shake the foundations of human history. Buried beneath millennia of sand and forgotten time, he unearthed thousands of clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped script. But it wasn't the tablets themselves that were shocking, it was what they said. These ancient Sumerian texts spoke of beings who came from the sky, kings who ruled for thousands of years, and a civilization so advanced that it shouldn't have existed when it did. They called them the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. But here's what historians don't tell you. According to these texts, the last Anunnaki king didn't just disappear. He left behind a warning. A warning we're only beginning to understand today. If you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about human civilization, hit that subscribe button to Histronics right now, because what you're about to discover will change how you see our past forever. I'm going to show you evidence, real archaeological evidence. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this story was buried for over 4,000 years. Welcome back to Histronics, where we uncover the hidden chapters of human history that mainstream narratives overlook. Before we dive into this rabbit hole, let me be clear about something. I'm not here to sell you fantasy. I'm not here to peddle conspiracy theories. What I'm about to share with you comes directly from translated Sumerian cuneiform tablets, archaeological findings, and historical records that predate the Bible, the Egyptian dynasties, and every other ancient civilization you've learned about in school. The Sumerians, the world's first known civilization, appeared seemingly out of nowhere in Mesopotamia, around 4500 BCE. They had no primitive phase, no trial and error period. They emerged fully formed with advanced mathematics, astronomy, complex legal systems, and architectural knowledge that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. And their own texts tell us exactly how this happened. They weren't the first, they were taught by the Anunnaki. Now here's where it gets fascinating and controversial. The Sumerian king list, an ancient stone tablet discovered in the early 20th century, records the reigns of kings before and after what they call the Flood. But the pre-Flood kings. They ruled for impossibly long periods, some for over 28,000 years. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as mythology. Religious fundamentalists claim it validates biblical flood narratives. But what if both are missing the point? What if these texts are trying to tell us something far more extraordinary and far more terrifying about who we are and where we came from? Let's start with the hard evidence, the kind that makes academic historians uncomfortable. In 1976, author Zecharia Sitchin published The 12th Planet, bringing the Anunnaki into popular consciousness. But Sitchin didn't invent the Anunnaki. The Sumerians wrote about them extensively, thousands of years before Sitchin was born. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, describes the Anunnaki as a group of deities who came to Earth. But here's the twist. The Sumerian texts don't call them gods in the mystical sense we understand today. They use the term En, Una, Ki, which literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. Now pay attention to this detail, because it's crucial. The Sumerians were obsessive record keepers. They documented everything: trade transactions, astronomical observations, legal disputes, agricultural yields. These weren't primitive people creating campfire stories. They had the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematics we still use today for time and angles. They accurately mapped our solar system, including planets that wouldn't be officially discovered until the 20th century. The clay tablets describe the Anunnaki coming to Earth in search of gold, not for decoration, for survival. According to the texts, their planet's atmosphere was deteriorating, and they needed gold particles to repair it. This might sound like science fiction, but modern scientists have actually proposed using metal particles in the atmosphere to combat climate change, a concept called stratospheric aerosol injection. The tablets say the Anunnaki initially did the mining themselves, but the work was brutal. After a rebellion among the lower-ranking Anunnaki workers, the leadership made a decision that would change everything. They would create a worker species by genetically modifying the primitive hominids already on Earth. They called this creation Adamu, which means of the earth. Sound familiar? The texts describe a process that eerily resembles genetic engineering, taking the essence of the Anunnaki and mixing it with the clay of Earth. Biblical scholars have noted that Adam comes from Adamah, meaning earth or clay. But here's the question I need you to think about, and I want you to answer in the comments. If ancient humans were so primitive, how did they conceptualize genetic engineering? Where did this idea even come from? The tablets describe multiple attempts, failures, and finally success in creating a being that was both Anunnaki and earthly, intelligent enough to follow instructions, but contained enough to remain workers. This is where the story gets even stranger. The Sumerian king list is one of the most mysterious documents in archaeology. Written in cuneiform around 2100 BCE, it chronicles the kings of Sumer from the beginning of their civilization. But it's divided into two distinct periods: before the flood and after the flood. The pre-flood section lists 8 kings who ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. Let me repeat that. 241,200 years. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, supposedly ruled for 28,800 years alone. Mainstream archaeologists have a simple explanation. It's mythology, exaggeration. The ancients didn't understand time the way we do, but here's what they don't explain. Why would a civilization so precise about everything else, a culture that could calculate the lunar month to within fractions of a second, suddenly become wildly inaccurate when recording their own history? Unless they weren't being inaccurate at all. The tablets describe these early rulers as Anunnaki themselves, or hybrid offspring of Anunnaki and humans. If these beings had different biology, perhaps slower aging, different cellular regeneration, their lifespans would naturally be vastly different from ours. Now, before you dismiss this entirely, consider this. The oldest verified person in modern history lived to 122. But certain species of whales can live over 200 years. The Greenland shark can live for 400 years. The immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis dohrni, can technically live forever by reverting to its juvenile state. If nature can produce such biological diversity on one planet, why is it so impossible that beings from a different evolutionary path, or even a different world, might have dramatically extended lifespans? But here's what nobody talks about. Here's the part that was deliberately hidden. The Sumerian texts don't just describe the Anunnaki as benevolent teachers who uplifted humanity. They describe something far more complex and far more disturbing. They describe a civil war, a conflict among the Anunnaki themselves. The tablets speak of Enlil and Enki, 2 half-brothers, both Anunnaki leaders, who had fundamentally different views on humanity. Enki, according to the texts, viewed humans with something approaching compassion. He's credited with warning the human Ziusudra, later called Noah in Hebrew texts, about the coming flood. Enki wanted humanity to have knowledge, to evolve, to become more like the Anunnaki. Enlil, on the other hand, saw humans as a mistake that had gotten out of control. He advocated for their destruction. This wasn't mythology. This was recorded history describing a power struggle that would determine the fate of the entire human species, and the last Anunnaki king. He was caught directly in the middle of this conflict. His name was Ziusudra in Sumerian, Atrahasis in Akkadian, and Utnapishtim in later Babylonian texts. You might know him better as Noah. But the Sumerian version tells a very different story than the one you learned in Sunday school. According to the tablets, Ziusudra wasn't chosen by a single, omnipotent god. He was warned by Enki, in direct defiance of Enlil's decision to wipe out humanity through a catastrophic flood. The texts are explicit. This wasn't divine judgment in the moral sense. It was a decision by the Anunnaki Council to erase their failed experiment and start over. Think about that. We're not talking about mythology here. We're talking about ancient texts describing what amounts to genocide, with one faction trying to save a remnant of humanity against the wishes of another faction. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known pieces of literature, describes Utnapishtim as a human who was granted immortality after surviving the flood. He becomes a bridge between the mortal world and the divine, the last human to directly interact with the Anunnaki before they withdrew from direct rule. But here's the crucial detail that changes everything. Ziusudra's story doesn't end with the flood. After the waters receded, according to the tablets, the Anunnaki leadership made a decision. They would withdraw from direct governance of humanity. They would become observers rather than rulers. The age of Anunnaki kings walking among humans would end. Why? The text suggests that the Anunnaki themselves were divided, perhaps even weakened by their internal conflicts. Some interpretations suggest they had to return to their homeworld. Others indicate they deliberately chose to step back and allow humanity to develop independently. But Ziusudra, the last king who bridged both worlds, was given a choice. He could remain immortal in the realm of the Anunnaki, or he could stay with humanity and eventually die. The texts say he chose immortality, but with a condition. He would wait. He would preserve the knowledge of what came before. And he would watch to see if humanity would one day be ready to know the truth. Here's my second question for you, and I really want you to think about this one. If an advanced civilization deliberately stepped back from guiding humanity, what would they be looking for? What would prove we were ready? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now here's where archaeological evidence meets legend in an unsettling way. After the flood period, dated by geologists to around 10,000 BCE when massive climate changes actually did occur, human civilization suddenly explodes with advancement. Within just a few thousand years, we go from hunter-gatherers to building cities, developing writing, creating complex mathematics, studying astronomy. The Göbekli Tepe temple complex in Turkey, dated to 9600 BCE, shows architectural sophistication that shouldn't exist for its time period. Massive stone pillars, intricate carvings, astronomical alignments, built by people who supposedly didn't even have agriculture yet. Egyptian pyramids demonstrate mathematical precision and astronomical alignment that modern engineers struggle to explain. Across the globe, ancient cultures that supposedly never contacted each other share remarkably similar flood myths, stories of sky gods, and legends of ancient kings who ruled for impossible lengths of time. Coincidence? Collective imagination? Or inherited memory from a time before recorded history? The Mesopotamian texts contain something that most translations gloss over. Something that might be the most important part of this entire story. Before the Anunnaki withdrew, before Ziusudra accepted immortality and stepped away from the human world, there was a warning left behind, not in words, but in a pattern, a test, if you will. The ancient texts describe the Anunnaki leaving behind knowledge, but intentionally fragmenting it, scattering it across different cultures, different languages, different continents. The texts suggest this was deliberate. Humanity would only be able to piece together the full picture when they had evolved enough to communicate globally, to share knowledge across barriers, to think collectively rather than tribally. In other words, the knowledge was hidden in plain sight, waiting for a time when humanity would be technologically and socially advanced enough to see the full picture. And that time might be now. Consider this. For the first time in human history, we can read Sumerian cuneiform. We can compare texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and Central America. We can use satellite imaging to discover lost cities beneath jungles and deserts. We can decode the human genome and understand genetic engineering. We finally have the tools to understand what they were trying to tell us. But here's the chilling part. The warning wasn't just about knowledge, it was about responsibility. The texts describe the Anunnaki's own struggles with their technology, their power, their conflicts. They describe a civilization that nearly destroyed itself through internal division, through the misuse of advanced technology, through the hubris of playing God. Sound familiar? We stand at the same crossroads. We have genetic engineering, we have weapons that can destroy civilizations. We have technology advancing faster than our wisdom to use it responsibly. We have global connectivity, but we're more divided than ever. So here's my final question before we wrap up, and I genuinely want to hear your perspective in the comments. If the Anunnaki story is true, and they're watching us now, what do you think they see? Are we ready, or are we repeating their mistakes? The last Anunnaki king chose to step away and wait. The question is, what was he waiting for? So where does this leave us? Whether you believe the Anunnaki were literal extraterrestrial beings, an advanced pre-flood human civilization, or symbolic representations of natural forces, the archaeological evidence is undeniable. Something extraordinary happened in humanity's deep past. Something that our ancestors tried desperately to record and preserve. The Sumerian civilization appeared with fully formed, advanced knowledge. Their texts describe genetic engineering before we had the science to understand it. They mapped celestial bodies before we had telescopes. They built with precision that challenges modern engineering. And they told us, in text preserved for millennia, that they were taught, that someone came before. The last Anunnaki king, whether we call him Ziusudra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, or Noah, represents the final bridge between two worlds, between the civilization that existed before recorded history and the human story we know. His choice to step away, to become immortal but separate from humanity, mirrors a profound truth. Every child must eventually stand on their own. Every student must eventually surpass their teacher. Every civilization must eventually face its own challenges without the guidance of those who came before. Maybe that's the real test. Maybe that's what they're waiting to see. Can we unify our knowledge without destroying ourselves in the process? Can we achieve technological advancement while maintaining wisdom and compassion? Can we become what the Anunnaki hoped we might be? Or will we repeat the cycle that nearly destroyed them? The answer to that question will be written by us, by the choices we make today, by whether we learn from the past or ignore it, by whether we seek truth or remain comfortable in ignorance. And that's why Historinics exists. To ask these uncomfortable questions, to examine the evidence that mainstream narratives ignore, to give you the information and let you decide what it means. If this video made you think differently about human history, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we're just getting started. Next week, I'm diving into the archaeological evidence of advanced technology in ancient Egypt that conventional archaeology can't explain, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And here's what I need from you right now. In the comments below, tell me this. After everything you've heard today, do you think the Anunnaki story is literal history, advanced allegory, or something in between? Give me your honest take. And if you have sources or evidence I didn't mention, share them. Let's build this knowledge together. Also, drop a comment answering this. If you could ask the last Anunnaki king one question, what would it be? I'm going to read the best answers in next week's video. Share this video with someone who questions mainstream history. Someone who isn't afraid to explore uncomfortable ideas. Someone who, like you, knows that there's more to our past than we've been told. The last Anunnaki king is waiting. The question is, are we ready to prove ourselves worthy of the truth? This is Historinics. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next investigation.